Welcome to episode 5 of Podcast of the Rings. Every time I'm about to say the name of our podcast, I'm not sure that I have it right until it's coming out of my mouth. I'm Jessica Lynn Verdi, and with me, as always, today, for the 5th time, is Alex Mitchell. Hi, Alex.
Hi, Jess. How's it going?
You know...
You remember the name of the show, so that's good.
Yeah.
So it must be going great.
It's a great day. It's so far
it's
so great. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm not one to complain about another opportunity to be alive and miserable, you know.
Jesus.
Just kidding.
Speaking of miserable, we're about to get dark.
So I was going to say, it's not surprising that we're going to talk about the struggle of man, seeing as sometimes we're in the struggle of man. At times.
This is,
This is supposed to be a fun podcast, Alex.
Oh, well, it's very fun, but in that fun, there's ups and there's downs, and I would say the tale we're talking about today, the history of Númenor, it's kind of one of the down periods. One of the down periods in the history of Arda and men.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, it's also coinciding with the other things that the elves and the dwarves were going through, right?
Yeah.
Timeline-wise.
It's happening concurrent to a lot of stuff.
Do the men ever have good things happen to them?
Yes.
Okay. So, and just to be fair, folks, we did not write The Lord of the Rings. We know that Tolkien referred to humans as men, so we will be doing the same.
We're using his terminology and acknowledging that maybe it's not the best.
It's not the best, but it is a catch-all term for humans. It's a way to refer to humans, and we'll be using...
The race of man is sort of...
The race of man is how we'll be referring to it. They can't have a man without a woman. Anyway, I don't know.
Unless you're the dwarves, apparently.
Yeah, right. Again, you spit on the ground, you throw a rib on there, and then you got your lady dwarf.
Yeah, wait 30 minutes, bake on 450 degrees.
It's like those sponge capsules that you put in water.
Yeah, the little dinosaurs that break out of the egg. Yeah.
Yep, totally. Yeah, you get it. That's how we're going to have babies. I'm going to get pregnant. I'm just going to put seeds in the ground and see what happens.
Yeah, it seems like an easier method.
The stretching of body parts doesn't sound like anything I want to be a part of. Anyway, this is a wonderful way to start off a podcast. First 2 minutes, really popping off.
What do we do on the show?
So we are excited, as one can possibly be, for the new TV show coming to Amazon Prime called The Rings of Power, which is set in the Second Age of Arda, which is Tolkien's world, which is our world before we got here, essentially, how he likes to, idealize it. I believe it does cover a little bit of the First Age, and I'm learning all of this because I don't know a lot, but I want to know more as someone who wants to be excited by the TV show. I don't know if you're like me, but I'm like, cool, this kind of seems cool, but why should I care about this TV show that I have no idea about? Like, even going into The Lord of the Rings, I knew who Frodo Baggins was, and so I was like, gonna go watch that. And I know some people didn't know, but there's still a lot of public zeitgeist about it that kind of made people go, oh, I would watch that. There's not as much information as to what happened in the Second Age, First Age.
Right.
That's colloquially...
as you said, Gandalf and Bilbo and Frodo are household names, but Fingon and Feanor and... Fingon and Elendil, nobody knows who those people are.
No, I don't think anyone cares either. And if you've ever tried to read the Silmarillion, you know that that's not very fun. So Alex is one of those weirdos.
Debatable.
Alex is one of those weirdos who gets it, wants it, knows all the things, and has a knack for making some information digestible. Sometimes he gets a little long-winded, but I'm just kidding. He's delightful, and he's got a beautiful voice. So we thought we would deliver a podcast where there are two people on different sides of the spectrum, both appreciating the same world of work and learning more together.
Yeah. And
would you say I did a pretty good job there?
I think that's a great summary, and hopefully inspiring and educating and inflaming passions in listeners for this upcoming show.
Don't be interesting, be interested, Alex.
Exactly, and I'm very interested in the the world of Middle-earth, and
there you go.
Today's topic, Númenor. There's a lot to get through here, and we're not going to cover it all.
You're going to be the time police today.
I'm gonna try. I'm gonna gloss over a lot, so we're not getting super in depth with all this stuff. And I might, and then this episode might be a little long. We'll see. But there's a lot of history. There's a lot of history of Númenor.
Are you excited to talk about this stuff? Do you like
yes.
this part of the lore?
It's very dense. It's very cool. I actually, over on my Twitch stream, I read the Akalabeth, which is the tale of Númenor, because it's one of my favorite parts of the Silmarillion.
How long is it? Like a few pages?
It's not that long.
I see.
But
okay.
Within it, there's a lot, and then there's supplementary material that goes in and fills in some of the gaps. So we're not just talking about stuff in the Silmarillion. There's other bits, mainly the Silmarillion. But let's dive right in. We talked about the origins of the elves, and in order to understand the history of Númenor, we're going to go all the way back. The origins of men. So where do men come from? So
this one I know.
Oh, okay.
Wombs.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's where you think they come from in Middle Earth.
Elves wanted baby pets, baby dolls.
Sure.
And so they're like, "Oh, we'll make little mortal things for you," and then they made wombs, kind of like the Matrix.
Yeah, they're just like coming out of that pot, like with that weird fluid, and then ripping out a spinal plug.
100,000%.
Sadly, no. That might have made for a more interesting story. They pretty much come to Middle Earth the same exact way as the elves. They just wake up. In this place called Hildorian, in the far east, further east than Cuivennen, which is where the elves awoke. And
why? I know this is not good for a podcast. It's going to be an episode that's going to be really long. But if elves were made, and they're like, these are the cool chosen ones, why would, what's the god's name? The guy in, not Anatar, the
Eru
other guy.
Iluvatar.
Eru, right. Eru of Avatar. Why would he be like, you know what, let me make these want-wans over here that are kind of the same. What's the point of giving us both?
Well, they're his second children, and they serve a different purpose than the elves. They have a different
are they donor children?
No, those are the dwarves. They're the adopted. Dwarves are the adopted.
No, donor children are the second child you have in a family.
Okay.
If your first child gets sick, you can give them one of the lungs. You can give them one of the kidneys from the donor children.
I understand the terminology now. I don't know if a transplant of an organ between a man and an elf would work. I don't know the compatibility there. Are the blood types even the same? Who knows?
Are humans the pawns, Alex?
Well, so this is interesting because
I'll just let you talk.
No. But I think you bring up good points that any reader or fan would have of like, well, elves are these amazing creatures. Why would men exist? They're so much inferior, but they have something that the elves don't. And that is, they have a different perspective on life because they have what is called the gift of
death,
the gift of men, which is they die, right? They are much shorter lived. And so they're much more passionate. They're much more driven in certain ways than elves are. And they're not bound to the fate of Arda nearly as much as elves, because elves just remain kind of forever, even after their bodies die. Their spirits just go to the halls of Mandos and then they're remade eventually. Whereas men, I think, and I could be wrong, but I believe in the cosmology, their spirits do go to the halls of Mandos, but they don't share the same fate as elves as far as where their spirit goes. No one really knows. So they're much different. Okay. They have a different perspective on life, and they sort of just are better in different areas.
You're my better man.
And you're my elf? Is that another word?
Oh, okay. I'll be your Luthien.
There you go. The Luthien to my Baron. Mm-hmm. So the men awake at the beginning of the first age in Hildorian in the Far East. Now they awaken at the time that the sun and the moon are made.
Oh.
So there were no sun and moon up to this point in the beginning of the first age, because remember, Telperion and Laurelin were the things that lit the world, the two trees.
But they were akin to the moon and the sun, right? Because one was gold and one was silver.
Yes, except their lights intermingled, so the lighting was kind of somewhat different. But when the trees are destroyed by Melkor and Ungoliant, they try and the Valar try and revive the trees, and they're unable to. So instead, what they do is they take a single fruit from each of the trees and use those to make the sun and the moon. And then there are two Maiar, I can't remember the names off the top of my head, but they are kind of given the task of bearing the sun and the moon. So there is a Maiar spirit that is just sort of shuttling the sun and the moon. And at first, the sun arose in the west, and that first sunrise coincides with the awakening of man. They look out into the west and see the rising sun. And then eventually the courses change a little bit, and then the sun rises in the east. And then they were more akin to the kind of mingling of the lights. There was no real nighttime, but then there is night. So that's the awakening of men. It coincides with the creation of the sun and its first journey.
I love this. I actually feel really vindicated now. I'm like, oh, cool. We're really cool. We got the sun and the moon on our backs. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, exactly. It's an important event, and it coincides with men coming into Middle-earth. So just like the elves, Morgoth gets there first, and he kind of makes stirs up some.
He's like, "Do you want the apple?"
Exactly. He starts making conflict and this recurring theme of a shadow or a darkness being laid upon their hearts by Morgoth.
Hey, take off your fig leaves. What are you doing with the things on?
And pitting them against each other is the main thing. There's
that's easy enough for humans.
Exactly, and that's kind of one of the sad through lines of this tale. So eventually, the men migrate, and they come into Beleriand, that land where most of the elves are in the first age, and they meet up with the Noldor elves.
And remind us who's part of the Noldor?
So
that we may remember from previous episodes.
Feanor and Fingolfin and Fingon. And all those different houses. So I don't want to get
Fingon.
I don't at this point I don't want to get too much into the first age stuff because it's not super relevant. But the things you need to know.
Yeah, I just think it's nice to have the thread connected is all, especially for my brain.
I believe Finrod is the first one to meet them. Finrod Felden.
Cool.
So there are and when they arrive, it's during this period called the Long Peace, when the Noldor have Angband under this hundreds of years long siege where they're keeping Morgoth at bay. It's after the Dagor Aglareb, which is the glorious battle where they just utterly defeat Morgoth's forces and drive him back. So the men are coming at a pretty good point in history. So they meet up with the Noldor elves, and there's three main houses of men. There's the House of Beor, the House of Haleth, and the House of Hador, and these are kind of the main three groups of men. Yes.
I'm not remembering, but Eru knows about Morgoth. Which are they like? Yeah. Were they like lovers and they got upset?
No. So Morgoth is one of, or Melkor as he was known then, was one of the Valar, and he was the strongest. And
that's right. He was cast out. That's right.
Yeah, he's kind of the Lucifer figure, and Eru is like God.
Thank you for reminding me.
He's at the top of the chain. So these three houses come in, and they help the Noldor and fight alongside them in the Wars of Beleriand against Morgoth. That's the Cliff Note version. And I did want to make a note here because we did make the mention of, well, the race of humans is called the race of men. But actually, it's kind of cool here, in one of the rare instances of an important female character in Tolkien, the House of Haleth, for a time, was led by Haleth, who's the daughter of Haldad. And Haldad was their original leader. Haldad, yes. He's the Haldaddy of the House of Haleth. And so the house takes on her name. She was a great leader in some of these conflicts. And so we have a cool representation of a female leader. And we have some female leaders in Númenor as well. Just
no,
wanted to
women
point
don't
that out.
do that stuff in Tolkien, but cool.
So we have these 3 houses of the Edain. The Edain is the Elvish name for men, and it becomes associated with specifically these houses that helped in the war, in the wars of Beleriand against Morgoth, even though that originally just meant men. So it's kind of a separate class, because there were men that either didn't get into Beleriand or later would go and join the forces of Morgoth, but these 3 houses that sort of remained allies with the Noldor are called the Edain. Mm-hmm. They're kind of like these almost noble houses.
Ordained
Edain. Yes.
I got it.
Yes. So, fast forwarding, we have the character of Eärendil. Okay, Eärendil the Mariner, who is descendant of Baronet Luthien. He's half elven. He is the.
I knew I heard the name before.
Yeah, he's the father of Elros and Elrond, right?
Mm.
So he is actually a descendant of not only Baronet Luthien, but he can trace his lineage to all 3 of the houses of the Edain, which is important. So he kind of has connections to all of these important families, important peoples.
Okay.
So as we know, he went to the Valar in order to ask for their help in the Wars of Beleriand. He sailed into the west and beseeched them, help us out, and they eventually did send the host of the Valar to defeat Morgoth, or help defeat Morgoth, and he fought in that battle. After this happens, Eonwe, who is a herald of Manwë, Manwë being the leader of the Valar, the king of the Valar, he Eonwe. He blesses the 3 houses of the Edain for their service, right? Okay. He rewards them for their service in the fight against Morgoth. He says, you didn't, run away, turn tail, join evil. We're going to give you a gift for serving in this conflict. Mm-hmm. And he blesses them with, quote, wisdom and power, and also long life is sort of their gift. So this is what distinguishes them from what later become known as middlemen by the Númenorians, who are just like regular men. They live to be, average lifespan. They're just, between...
Is Boromir a middleman? Do you know? Is that
no.
house? Okay.
He is, I don't want to get too much into that, but he is descendant from... well, actually, I don't know, because he is of the House of Stewards. He's from the line of the Stewards, so I don't know exactly. I think there might be like some, if you go way back far enough, and it's diluted through different marriages between regular men of Middle Earth and Númenorians. I think you could trace that lineage maybe back to, I don't know the exact family trees, but because he's the House of the Stewards, they're not technically like the royal house, so they wouldn't have the bloodline of Númenorians like Aragorn does, because he is a Dunedain. So they're gifted with this long life. They grow to be much taller as well, like 7 foot something. Yeah.
I actually don't like tall men all that much.
No, yeah, I wouldn't do it for you if you saw him.
No,
it would be intimidating.
I'd be scared.
It'd be imposing.
There's like theories that there were like actual giants on Earth that were like 7-8 feet tall, redheaded.
I've seen him on film, Andre. Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah.
It's a real thing.
Mm-hmm.
So, in addition to gaining this gift in body and spirit and mind, they also give the Edain their own little island, which the Valar call Andor, which means the land of gift. But the men, the Edain, call it Elena, which means starwards, because when this island is created, starwards, like towards the star.
Towards the star.
Yeah, not.
So that was the typo that Lucas. Yeah, okay. She's like, it's supposed to be Star Wars. Yeah.
Yeah. Who knew? Tolkien predicted another insanely popular fantasy franchise.
Not surprising at all.
Yeah. So the reason it's called this is because they follow the Star of Eärendil to get there.
Oh.
Which is kind of a cool little thing. The reason they're sort of gifted this thing. Oh, we followed the star. So Now they go from being just the Edain men to being the Dunedain, or Númenóreans. And another name for the island is Númenor.
Edain.
Right, Edain.
Edain?
Yeah, Edain.
Is the name they're given. So the Dunedain, what is the... Is there a hyphen in there? How is it spelled? No,
Dunedain.
So what does Dunedain?
I don't know. Again,
okay, but it is added to Edain.
I think that's probably the etymology of the word. Yeah. I am not an expert on etymological stuff in Tolkien. There's plenty of other people who are better.
I didn't know if that was part of your research. I was just asking.
No, I appreciate the inquiry. Look it up, folks. Email us. Let us know. Okay.
Or don't.
Or don't. So the Númenóreans are originally led by Elros, son of Eärendil. And he chooses, because he's a half-elf and is given the choice by the Valar, he chooses the fate of men. So he's also gifted this, blessing as their first king. And he takes the name Tar Miniator as king. So this is one of the common things that we'll see is, up to a certain point, all of the kings of Númenor take on an elvish name. They have their own name in Andunaic, I believe is the language, which is the language of men, and Númenor specifically. But they also take on an elvish name. So we have Númenor. It's being led by Elros, or Tar Miniator, as their first king. Now, the things you need to know about Númenor going in, we'll lay some foundations. There are two major cities in Númenor. One is Armenelos, and that is the royal city, and that sits in the center of the island. The island is kind of this five-pointed star shape, and so Armenelos sits smack dab in the middle, and then Andúnië lies in the west, and that is another major city where the lords of Andúnië sit. So there are, I believe, I think there's 6 regions. There's a central region, and then there's a sort of region on each of the points of the star of the island, and each of them have their kind of own lords that serve the king as counselors. So the Númenóreans, at first they have a very strong relationship with the elves. They just fought this war with them, and you have elves coming and sailing in from Tol Eressëa, which is an island off of the shores of Aman in the west. So there's, traffic with the elves of Aman between Númenor. So they speak Elvish there, they speak Quenya, and the kings take on those Elvish names. And they bring gifts. And one of these gifts the elves bring is the seedling of Celeborn. Not Celeborn, Galadriel's husband, but it means the same thing. Again, I can't remember. It means like silver or something. I don't remember. But was a tree in Tol Eressëa. They take a seedling from it and they give it to the Númenóreans. And this grows into the tree of Nimloth, or the white tree of Númenor, which will become important. Oh! Yeah.
With the blossoms.
Yes. We see that in the trailer.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, I'm sorry. It's the tree that doesn't blossom when the stewards
It's related to that. We'll get to the connection there. It's not the same tree, but there's a connection. So you are making that connection, but it's not.
Okay, I'm real good at
this. You're seeing it. You're seeing the Matrix. So the Númenóreans, because they live on an island, they become very skilled in shipbuilding and seacraft, and they're amazing mariners. That's kind of one of their defining characteristics. So one of the things that is a ground rule that's set in place. They're given this island by the Valar. They're, doing their thing. They're building these cities. But the Valar have this rule. There's one rule known as the Ban of the Valar, and they are forbidden from sailing so far into the west that they can no longer see their island, because the Valar do not. Mortals are not allowed in Aman. This is one of the things, and they don't want them to be tempted. So they give them this rule of you can't go so far out that you don't see home, right?
Okay.
And this will cause some conflict later on. So because of this ban, the Númenóreans go, okay, cool, no problem. Thanks for the island. And it's all fine and good for a while. But because of the ban, they start sailing east. And eventually, in about 600 of the Second Age, they start arriving in Middle-earth, they meet some of these middlemen, right? Men who were not a Dane, they don't have these long lives, and they start teaching them a lot of these things that they've learned because they were gifted with this knowledge and wisdom, and they've been trading with the elves, and so their culture is much more advanced. So they start teaching them agriculture, masonry, smithing, various craft skills. And they're seen as these benevolent figures. They just show up and kind of, teach them this stuff. They're almost, some of the middlemen see them as gods almost, right? Kind of this sort of Norse idea, right? Of these larger than life figures coming into Earth and then leaving. And it's like, oh, look, now we can grow corn better. And they also, some of them come to Linden and befriend our guy we talked about last time, Gil-galad. So they strike up this relationship with Linden and Gil-galad. And in 750, the Second Age, Aldarion, a Númenorian, who later becomes king, founds the Guild of Venturers, and their primary purpose is just to explore and map out the various coasts and meet people. And they end up founding Vinyaland on the coast of Middle-earth, which becomes a source of lumber for Númenor, because one of the things is they're building so many ships that they're cutting down all of their trees in Númenor, and they go, okay.
The poor Ents. Yeah,
well, I don't think there's Ents in this particular part, but yeah, I mean, if there were, they'd be like, look somewhere else. So they start sourcing lumber from there. And then something we talked about last week in Second Age 882, Gil-galad warns the current king Tar-Meneldur, who's the fifth king of Númenor at this point. So we're on king number 5 already by 880 years into the Second Age. So as I said,
impressive.
Yeah, they're very long-lived. He begins warning him of evil stirring in the east, right? We talked about that last time in this letter.
The shadow.
Yeah, the shadow. Yes. So they're warned of this shadow growing in the east by Gil-galad. And so they begin making preparations. They're not, amassing massive armies, but they're saying, okay, maybe we should start focusing on making weapons, assembling an army. And then jump forward 300 years. In the 1200s, Númenor begins establishing permanent settlements in Middle-earth. So before they were just kind of like these little outposts, but now permanent settlements are happening, and conflicts start happening with the middlemen. And our good buddy Sauron starts to, see this as an opportunity and persuade some of these middlemen to fight back against the Númenorians, playing upon those tensions. So he's indirectly...
So he's Trump.
I don't want to get into that.
Okay.
If there's one thing I can agree on, it's that Tolkien's work is not political allegory, so I don't want to...
Not allegory.
I don't want to make those connections.
I'm just doing it for myself to understand.
Fair.
But carry on.
Fair. And now we're doing a lot of time jumps because we got to get to the good stuff. 1700 of the Second Age, Númenorians arrive to help Gil-galad in the War of the Elves and Sauron. This is under the rule of Tar-Minastir, the 11th king, and his Tar-Minastir's son, Kiriatur, is the one who leads the navy sent to help. And this is where the Númenorians sort of first get their first taste of military might and the power that they have. And this will come back. They go, oh, we're actually, we could exercise a lot of influence if we wanted to by force. That was the first major conflict they had. Jumping forward to 1800 of the Second Age, this is where things start to get a little wonky. Start to get a little less than utopian. So the Númenorians, not only do they now have permanent settlements in Middle-earth, but they start to establish dominion over the native inhabitants. They start taxing them and become rulers rather than...
So you're saying it's not an allegory?
No.
Okay.
I'm not saying there aren't real-world things being explored, but it's not allegorical. Gotcha. the comparison a lot of people make is because they were contemporaries and friends. Tolkien to C.S. Lewis. C.S. Lewis, his stories are one-to-one allegories for biblical stories. Tolkien doesn't do that. So they start ruling over the middlemen. Instead of just freely giving up this knowledge and wealth and culture, they start asking for taxes in return and becoming their leaders. And they take these settlements and turn them more into fortresses, increasing their military presence in Middle-earth. And Sauron sees this. He sees their growing power and influence, and he hasn't fully... He just got his butt kicked 100 years ago. He hasn't fully regained his power, so he turns his attention eastward. The Númenóreans are settling along the western coast, so he says, all right, I'll leave that to them for now. Let me dip my hands in the east. So Tar Kiryatan, now ruler, the guy who led those fleets against Sauron, in 1869, he forcefully takes rule from his father, Tar Minastir, which is the first time that's happened, as opposed to the leader just giving over rulership when they deem appropriate. He forcefully takes it from his father. Again, we're starting to see these cracks in the veneer. And he builds a massive royal fleet. Remember, he had tasted victory in this conflict against Sauron. He wants more. And it's during his rule that the Númenorian people begin to start questioning the ban of the Valar. Just saying, hey, I mean, why shouldn't we? Why are the Valar keeping this from us? Like, what's going on here? Why can't we go into the west? We've already look what we did in the east. This is great. Why can't we go west? Why can't we be free to do whatever we want? We want to taste more from life. They're not full out rebelling, but just kind of the thing that everyone hates to hear. I'm just asking questions, right?
I'm just saying.
I'm just saying. Why can't we go? Why can't we go west?
Yeah.
So that's when the unrest starts in the minds of the people. Now, jumping forward to 2029 of the Second Age, we're 2,000 years into the Second Age. Tar Autonomir takes over rulership. And this is...
I love that name. Tar Autonomir? That's a cool name.
These Elvish names are very cool. And they also have Adunaic names, which I don't know off the top of my head. Go look it up, folks. Go read the Line of Kings. I believe they're in there. So it's during his rule, some almost 200 years later, that some Númenóreans begin to actually speak out against the ban. They're no longer just questioning and pondering. They're going, hey, we should be able to sail west and go into Aman. And so the elves, remember the elves from Tol Eressëa, are going back and forth from Númenor. So they catch wind of this, and they let the Valar know that this is happening. And Manwë sends a messenger to Númenor to basically explain the reasoning that, look, Eru Ilúvatar is the one who gave you the gift of men, that is, that you will die, and there's no way to escape that. You can't live forever. Aman is not for you. Accept your fate. And look at all we've already given you. Just be careful, okay? This is as good as it's going to get for you, and don't tempt fate, essentially.
I don't like that. I want more now.
That's kind of the thing that Tolkien is...
The dude.
Yeah, exactly. It's the thing that Tolkien is exploring here, is man's desire for more power and what they'll do and the things, the lies they will tell themselves.
I understand power now.
Yeah. So this happens, and Tar Autonomir doesn't necessarily take it fully to heart. He is the first king since Elros, Tar Miniatur, to rule for life. So all the kings before him, at least all the kings after Elros before him, had, when they reached a certain age, said, okay, my time of rule is up. My son and or daughter is ready to rule. Let me pass leadership to them. Tar Autonomir, he wants to hold on to that power as long as he can, and he does not cede the throne until he dies. And this carries on, of ruling until death.
Got it. The tradition as such. Interesting.
Yes. So things are beginning to slide into, this seems a little bit more tyrannical than before, less wise leaders and more just power hungry kind of, these changes are slowly creeping into the line of kings. And this is also when you begin to see the start of two factions emerge, which in the next ruler, the divide will become more. These two factions are the king's men and the faithful. And so the king's men are in the majority, and they follow the policies of the king. Their main priorities are the amassing of wealth and power for themselves. And they are somewhat skeptical and fearful and opposed to the elves and the Valar. The Kingsmen stop speaking Elvish, really. They stop teaching Elvish to their children. So they are kind of anti-West, anti-elves, anti-Valar. And then you have the faithful, who are in the minority, and they mainly reside, their sort of base is in Andunier, that settlement in the west, where the elves would come in, right? They are more in contact with the elves. They're in the minority, and they remain loyal to the Valar. They are friends with the elves. They still speak Elvish, all of this. So they're maintaining the old ways, essentially. So in 2221 of the Second Age, you get Tar on Kalaman, the 14th king of Númenor. And this is when, under his rule, the king's men begin to found a lot of strongholds in the south, including a place you may know from Lord of the Rings, Umbar.
Minas Tirith.
No, not Minas Tirith. Not yet. We'll get there. Umbar. This is a major stronghold for the Númenorians and the Kingsmen specifically in the south. This is where the Corsairs of Umbar come from in Lord of the Rings. So they're originally, they can trace their roots back to Númenor and the Kingsmen. And the faithful, shortly thereafter, in 2350, established their main haven in Middle-earth, Pelargir, which you also might know from Lord of the Rings. It is in the Third Age, located in the southern region of Gondor. So that's their main stronghold. So you get a lot of these cities that we see.
Is that where it's across the lake from where they are at Helm's Deep?
No.
Hold on. Where Faramir was?
That's Osgiliath.
Okay, got it.
Which was, I believe, originally known as Minas Ithil? No.
Okay.
Minas Anor or Minas Ithil? I can't remember which, because I think Minas Morgul was originally Minas Anor or Minas Mithil, one of those two. I'm blanking on which one is which. But no, this is much further south.
Okay.
But you have these sort of things being set up here that will later still be relevant. These settlements will still be relevant to men in the Third Age and beyond. So we have this rift widening between the Kingsmen and the faithful. And in 2899, Ar Adunacor takes over. Now you may be noticing this name doesn't track. We had Tar Minastir, Tar on Kalaman, right? Tar Atanamir. Ar Adunacor. He takes his name in Adunaic, the language of Númenor. He's the first king to go by an Adunaic name. And his name means Lord of the West, which is a direct dig at the Valar, because that is essentially the title of Manwë, is Lord of the West, King of the West. He's taken a shot at the Valar with his name. It's a big diss and a big statement in I want more power, right?
Mm-hmm.
He is the first king to ban the speaking of Elvish in his presence. Not entirely, but in his presence, he says, I don't want to hear Elvish.
I mean, that says all you need to hear.
Exactly, right? It speaks to his character.
Correct.
And he begins openly persecuting the faithful. This isn't just sort of we have two groups and they disagree. He begins persecuting them. So politically, it's not good for you if you are a member of the faithful. And it's during this time that the elves see all of this and go, okay, we don't want to be involved. And they really stop openly coming to Númenor. They sometimes visit in secret, and we'll see that a couple times, but they stop coming a lot to Númenor. So this is where we get into further going down this dark path. In 3102 of the Second Age, we get Ar-Gimmelzor. He completely bans the speaking of Elvish in Númenor. He punishes any faithful that welcome in Elvish ships to Númenor because he considers them spies of the Valar. And he takes the remaining faithful. Remember, they were residing in Andunier in the west. And he forcefully relocates them to the eastern side of the island to purposefully put them further from Aman and Tol Eressëa so that there's no way that they could really contact the elves, even if they were coming in secret. And to keep a closer eye on them, because our Menelaus is a little bit closer to the east. So he wants to keep an eye on these untrustworthy, faithful folks. So he relocates them to Romena, or Romena, I believe is how you say it. And it's at this point that a lot of the faithful just say, okay, we don't like it here. We're going to leave for Pelargir. And there's still faithful in Númenor, but a lot of them just get up and leave. They're like, this is too much for us. And Ar-Gimmelzor also begins to neglect the white tree of Nimloth that was given. He doesn't tend to it. And he also, I didn't talk about this much, but there's a lot of religious rites and ceremonies that would be done for the purpose of worshiping the Valar. And he doesn't make offerings to the Valar, doesn't do any of that.
Do the Valar want to be worshipped? It's kind of weird.
I mean, they want to be respected. It's not like worship me, give me tribute, but some level of respect. I mean, they gifted the Númenorians long life, wisdom, and power,
which I also
and
have
a whole land.
Why did they give the Númenorians long life if the gift was mortality?
To extend their time in Arda. I mean, they weren't living hundreds and hundreds of years, but they'd lived to be, I think, almost 200. And if you were of the line of Elros, I believe, Elros lived to be much longer because he had elf blood.
Yeah. But
just regular Númenorians, they would live, into their hundreds, right? Into their late hundreds sometimes. And it is to be said that this will become more pronounced later on when these kind of the shadow and these corruptions and everything become worse. The lifespan of the Númenorians actually does decrease as time goes on, and they start to wander and diverge from the things that really they should be doing. But it's a gift. It's saying, look, we know your time is limited in Arda, and that's by design of Eru, but look, we can extend it a little bit and give you a little bit more time to develop your culture and your skills and spend time with your family and all this, to make great works and achieve great things and enjoy life. It's not immortality, but it's something, right?
Right.
But it ends up becoming their undoing, sadly. Or it is leveraged to become their undoing, which we'll get to. So after Ar-Gimmelzor, we have the rule of Tar Palantir. Now, it is to be said, Ar-Gimmelzor marries a woman named Inzelbeth. And Inzelbeth is descendant from the lords of Andunier. So the faithful, that is. So she is more of a friend to the elves, and her philosophy and worldview do not necessarily mesh with Ar-Gimmelzor. It is said, I think in the Silmarillion, there is little love between them, is how Tolkien puts it. And together, they have two sons. One becomes the ruler Tar Palantir, and the other is his brother Gimmelkad. Now, Tar Palantir seeing as he takes an elvish name when he becomes king. And he becomes king, for those keeping track, in 3177 in the Second Age. He's the 24th king of Númenor, where we've been through a lot of kings.
Yeah.
Now, he takes after his mother, Inzelbeth, and he is much kinder to the faithful. He is, as a ruler, attempting to repair some of the damage that is done by his predecessors.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the Valar at this point are kind of looking at him saying, look, it's too late. We appreciate what you're doing, but the damage is done, right? They don't instantly go, oh, look, elves are coming back and flocking. They go, no, look, there's been damage. It's going to take a lot more than just one ruler to repair this relationship. But as you may have guessed, any keen-eyed listeners, is that an oxymoron? Keen-eared listeners, Tar Palantir, the elvish name he takes, is because he has the gift of...
A Palantir.
Well, he does not. Or actually, at this point, no, I don't think he does. I don't think the Palantir...
But I did catch it, and I didn't want to stop you because I keep on stopping
No,
you.
that's okay. At this point, I don't believe the Palantir are in Númenor. I don't know the exact date they came over. We'll get to the origins of them. It's relates to one of these other characters we'll get to. But he has the gift of foresight. Okay? And one of the things that he does when he's a ruler is he has a prophecy that...
Oh, no.
Once the White Tree of Nimloth dies, so too does the line of kings in Númenor. He foresees this. And this will become important. Now, Tar Palantir has one daughter, Miriel. Okay? So that's his lineage. Miriel. Yes. Now, his brother, Tar Palantir's brother, Gimmelkad, takes after their father much more. And his father would have wished Gimmelkad to rule, but he's the younger brother, so that is not the case. But Gimmelkad becomes the leader of the Kingsmen, right? The Kingsmen, they have a king that's more kind to the faithful, so the Kingsmen now sort of follow Gimmelkad. And Gimmelkad has a son. Gimmelkad's son is Ar-Pharazôn, a character we will...
If you're about to tell me Muriel and him hook up, I'm going to be upset.
So he has a son, Ar-Pharazôn, who we'll see in the show. Just breezing past that one. Who we'll see...
Do they?
We'll see in the show, Ar-Pharazôn. And what ends up happening...
Oh, Alex, what happened?
You may be related to Tar Palantir. So... Ar-Pharazôn, you know what? You already mentioned it, so I'll skip ahead. Ar-Pharazôn does eventually marry Miriel, his cousin.
How did I know? Why did I know?
I'm surprised.
It was the first thing I thought. I was like, I must have had the gift of foresight and read your mind.
Got a little of that Tar Palantir blood in you, apparently.
I hope I don't have my cousin's blood in me.
No.
Jesus.
But that's jumping ahead a little bit. But that does happen. So when Ar-Pharazôn is young, okay, Tar Palantir is still ruler. He fights in the wars against Sauron in Middle-earth. They are actively fighting against Sauron. And he becomes a great captain and military leader. His father, Gimmelkad, dies prematurely. And he hears news of this and returns to Númenor. And with him, he brings back many riches, wealth, and freely gives these out to the people and becomes very popular amongst the people because of this. And so he takes over his father's position, essentially, as leader of the Kingsmen.
The Kingsmen.
Now, when he is back in Númenor, Tar Palantir dies. And according to the Númenorian laws and traditions... Even if he doesn't have a male heir, leadership passes to his eldest heir, which is Miriel. So there are, and have been, we glossed over a lot of them because there's so much history, and we're already so far into this episode. There are women who lead Númenor and are queens.
Right. You did say that in so many words, but yes.
So rulership by the law and tradition of Númenor goes to Miriel, and she becomes Tar Miriel. But Ar-Pharazôn marries her against her will. He forcefully marries her and takes power.
Takes kingship.
He takes power from her
Jesus.
in 3255.
I hate this.
He's not a good guy.
This.
He's not a good guy. And now it's interesting, side note, we do see Ar-Pharazôn and Miriel in the trailer. She is called Tar Miriel, and she is referred to as Queen Regent. So I'm not sure in the show if they're going to have this period where she's ruling and it's before Ar-Pharazôn like forcefully marries her, or maybe she's ruling instead of Tar Palantir, like in the stead of Tar Palantir, because he has either given over rulership or is unable to rule. I'm not sure how they're going to deal with that because we haven't seen Tar Palantir. Who knows if he's going to be a character in the show or just a name mentioned or not at all.
I think they really wanted to get the Game of Thrones people in that liked the brother-sister sitch. And this is how they're going to drop us in.
As like one of the first things we see is Ar-Pharazôn.
I just think I think it's going to be like payoff. Like, oh, by the way, they're cousins.
Yeah, it's not going to be Game of Thrones where the first scene you see Cersei and Jaime going at it.
No, because it's not egregious, but I think it is like one of those things, hey, yeah, that stuff does happen here too. It's kind of like the Middle Ages. Let's go.
Yeah. Even though it's against the law for first cousins to marry.
Yeah,
it's not an acceptable thing he's doing, even according to Númenorian law.
Oh my goodness.
Unlike in the Middle Ages where that was just the thing that happened all the time, is marrying
Oh my
cousins.
God. Yes.
So after Ar-Pharazôn forcefully marries Miriel and takes over the kingship, he hears that Sauron is attacking Númenorian settlements in Middle-earth. And in 3261, he assembles a large fleet and all of their power and sails to the stronghold of Umbar. And from Umbar, they march upon Mordor. And his goal here is to defeat Sauron. And what ends up happening is Sauron sees the military might of the Númenorians and thinks to himself, I can't take them on. So what does he do? He takes a fair form and he bends the knee. And he says, look, I accept your might. I am yours to do with what you will. And Ar-Pharazôn says, okay, well, we'll accept your surrender, but I want to keep an eye on you. I don't fully trust you. So they take him back to Númenor as a prisoner. And this is exactly what Sauron wants.
Oh, no.
Because he wants to be in the heart of Númenor so he can work his evil deeds from within. This is all going, not exactly his first plan, but his plan B is working out pretty well. So they take him back as prisoner. Now, we're going to jump for a second from that to another character who is important. And early on in Ar-Pharazôn's life was a friend of his, Amandil. Now, Amandil is the Lord of...
He's a big deal.
Super big deal where he comes from. Because he is the Lord. He's the Lord of Andunier. So he is a member of the faithful, the leader of the faithful, essentially. And his son, you may have heard of him, he's also a big deal because he's Elendil. Both huge deals. And Elendil's children, the grandsons of Amandil, Isildur and Anarion. So this is where they enter the story.
Gotcha.
So, Amandil fought with Ar-Pharazôn when they were both young in these conflicts against Sauron, and was a friend of his, and he's a counselor to his now because he's the Lord of Andunier. So he's one of the members of the Council of the Scepter, and in giving the king wisdom, hopefully. So Sauron comes back to Númenor as a prisoner, and immediately he gets to work. He starts influencing the Númenorians. He sees that the king's men have this distrust of the Valar, and he starts playing upon that and plays into their egos and their arrogance and their desire for power. And almost, immediately. A lot of the lords, the members of the council, just fawn over him, hang on his every word. They're like, "You're great, Sauron." He's the ultimate yes man, including Ar-Pharazôn, the king. Even though he was taking him back as a prisoner to keep an eye on him, now he's almost not taking direction from him, but he's definitely influenced by Sauron. And eventually Sauron has amassed enough, and I will say, Amandiel not buying any of it. He's the only one. He's the only one who's like, this guy is talking nonsense. He's talking out of both sides of his mouth. And so eventually Sauron feels he has enough influence and tells the king and the counselors that true power comes from what he calls the darkness. And the lord of that being Melkor.
Star Wars.
Explain.
The true power comes from the dark side.
I see. It is very Emperor Palpatine. Have you heard the tale of Darth Plagueis the Wise? That's if they were watch. I'm sure. I don't think Tolkien ever explained or illustrated or told us the scenery in which Sauron was telling these lies. But if they were at a bubble opera, I wouldn't be surprised. I would not be surprised.
Thank you.
So he says true power comes from the void, the darkness. And the lord of that darkness is Melkor. He's a cool guy. Have you heard of him? And Ar-Pharazôn is curious. And he asks Sauron more. And begins to worship Melkor in secret. But not for long. He worships him in secret at first, and then begins to openly worship Melkor. Of all people. The big bad. Right? And many of the king's men follow him in his worship and begin worshiping Melkor as well. So this is not good. They were already on the bad side of the Valar. Now they're worshiping a false god. This is cult level stuff.
Right.
So Sauron everything's going according to plan, and so he whispers once again in the king's ear, "You know what you should do to really stick it to the Valar and show your dedication to Melkor? You should burn Nimloth down. You should chop down Nimloth, that beautiful white tree, and burn it." And at first...
That sounds cool.
Yeah, right? It's a great idea. And honestly, at first, Ar-Pharazôn is like, I don't know if I should do that. Because remember, Tar Palantir had that prophecy. When that tree dies, so too dies the line of kings. So at first he's reluctant and he doesn't do it. And who catches wind of this but Amandiel? And so he sends his grandson, Isildur, and Isildur goes in the night in secret, in disguise, sneaks past the guards that are guarding this tree day and night, and steals from it a single fruit and obtains many wounds and is very badly injured, but makes it back. And from this fruit, they grow a seedling, and it's cool imagery. They say when the first flower sort of sprouts and blooms, so too do all of Isildur's wounds heal, and he's fine. It's a very, very cool kind of imagery.
Gorgeous.
So he's successful in stealing this fruit, but then that's the powder keg moment for Ar-Pharazôn. He goes, "All right, we got to burn this. We got to chop this tree down and burn it." Right, these faithful, they're getting out of hand. But they don't identify who Isildur is because he's in disguise and everything. So his identity is kept a secret. But Sauron has a great temple built with a massive silver dome on it in Armenelos. And it is designed for the purpose of the worship of Melkor. And in it sits a great altar of fire that is ever burning. And in this altar, they burn the wood of Nimloth. And it says a great reek went up from it. And then imagery we see, I think when like Saruman is killed and a couple other times, the smoke kind of goes up into the air and then is blown off into the west, which is very symbolic. And that happens a couple times where we see smoke or vapor and then it's blown into the west. Image Tolkien likes to come back to.
Mm-hmm.
But not only do they want to sacrifice this living entity that is a tree, what else begins at this time? Human sacrifice. That's right. What dark cult to a evil god is complete without a bit of human sacrifice?
What?
I told you it was going to get dark. So that, it's a slippery slope. One day you're just saying, man, I want eternal life. The next day you're saying, you know what, I don't like elves. The next day you're saying, let me worship an evil god. And then before you know it, you're having human sacrifices on an altar of fire. You really got to be careful.
Yeah, wow. So
obviously, most of these human sacrifices are coming from people who are the faithful. But they don't say, oh, we're sacrificing you because you're the faithful. They come up with all these other reasons, like, oh, you're an enemy of the state, or you could be a spy. Like, they come up with all these other reasons, but it's really, they're just targeting the faithful. And this goes on for a while. And as I said before, the lifespan of Númenorians is kind of diminishing during this time of darkness when they start worshiping Melkor. It's, the gift that the Valar have given them is sort of waning a little bit. But Ar-Pharazôn does grow in wealth and military power during this time, despite being completely an evil dude. And he starts getting towards the end of his life. He becomes even more fearful of death. And so Sauron's influence over him becomes stronger, because remember, all these promises he's making are, look, if you do this, you can have all this power. True power comes from the void and Melkor and darkness, right? If you do all these things I'm saying, you can grasp eternal life, right? So he's becoming more and more incentivized as he gets closer and closer to death. So as he grows in military power and might, Sauron finally sees his moment. Ar-Pharazôn is getting older, and he has all this power, and he convinces him finally, look, you're strong enough to complete the plan. If you bring war to the Valar in the west and conquer Aman, if you conquer the Valar and take their lands, this is how you will gain immortality. You break the ban of the Valar, and you go there and you take it for yourself. And he buys it. He's scared. He goes, okay, I guess this is what I got to do. I've come this far. And so Númenor begins building the great armament in preparation for this war. And it is at this point that the Valar send even more warnings, this time in the form of great thunderstorms and these great storm fronts with thunder clouds in the shapes of eagles. So clearly this is a sign from the Valar. And earthquakes. The ground shakes. And instead of taking these as warnings of the Valar, probably because Sauron twisted the interpretation, Ar-Pharazôn goes, look, we got to strike first before they strike us, right? Look at this threat from the Valar, right? They sort of spin it that way, as opposed to hey, are you sure you want to do this? We're warning you. Look at how powerful we are. We don't want to do this. All of this is happening over the course of not many years, but I think like 7 years or something it takes to build the great armament. And Amandiel is very worried. Very worried, obviously. He's like, this is not a good idea. So what he does is he brings his son, Elendil, to him. And he says, look, get as many of the faithful as you can together. Prepare ships to leave. Remember, they're in the east now, in Romena. Right? So he says, get the ships you can, put the faithful on there, get ready to leave, bring what you can with you, and as soon as the armament sails out, go. Leave. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a play from the book of our ancestor, Eärendil, because Amandiel is also descendant from the line of Elros, just not the ruling line. Right? So he does have connection to Eärendil and Elros, right? I'm going to take a play from the Book of Eärendil. I'm going to attempt to sail to Aman myself, but just like Eärendil did before me, I'm going to do so in peace to beseech the Valar for their help. Because this has gone too far, right? This has gone too far for us to do anything about. I'm going to ask the Valar for help. So I'm going to go do that. You and your sons and all the faithful together, get ready to leave. So he does that. Spoilers, he's never heard from again. We don't know what happened to him. We don't know.
Come on.
We don't know.
Do you have any speculation? Or does anyone?
the way I see it, either he doesn't complete the journey, or he gets there and they don't agree to, like, it could be they don't agree to help because it's a much different situation than the Wars of Beleriand, where they're fighting against Morgoth, right? And this is a matter of the security of everybody, right? So it's a much different situation. So it could be either A, he didn't make it, B, he makes it, he pleads his case, and the Valar go, nope. And then from that situation, you either they punish him with death, potentially. That doesn't seem to me to be what would be likely. Or they go, you know what? You're a good guy. You're one of the few who remained.
You can hang out here.
But I don't think that also presents problems, because then
he skips out on his peak.
Well, yes, and Earendil is very special among like mortals to be given a place in Amon, right? So would they give him that place of, you know what, you're such a good dude, we're going to let you have a place in Amon? I don't know.
Yeah,
so like, what
right.
is his fate? Who knows? I don't know. Maybe they kill him and he's just like, all right, you join the halls of Amanda. Like, who knows? And maybe that's why Tolkien never says what happens, because he didn't know like what would actually happen, because he knows the Valar aren't going to like intervene and save everybody. So then what happens to Amandil? I think it's better left unknown. It's, speculation is good, but I think those are probably the likely options. I would say if I had to bet, he probably just doesn't make the journey. But then also that doesn't make sense, because we know he's a great mariner. So I don't know.
Right.
I don't know. Send in your theories, folks. Send us your letters. So we never hear from him again. We don't know what happens to him. Now, the great armament that they've been amassing is complete. Our Farazan sails into the west, and he literally has a throne on his ship. This is how cocky he is. He has a big throne built on his ship, Alcarandas, and they sail into the west. They eventually get to off the coast of Amon. They sail past Tol Eressëa, and our Farazan sees I'm blanking on the name. The big mountain of Amon, and is awestruck and nearly turns back. He nearly goes, this is something I've never seen before, and is struck by the power of the Valar. But he pushes onward.
Wow.
They set foot on Amon. And Manwë, what does he do? Obviously, they're looking at them like, what are you doing? What did you think was going to happen? And Manwë calls upon Eru Ilúvatar. Because again, this is something that when Manwë warned them, right, this is something the Valar cannot change. They cannot just go, all right, we're going to, yeah, sure, come on in, have a mortal life, right? No, this is something Ilúvatar ordained. So, he calls upon Eru and goes, all right, it's in your hands, buddy. We're going to cede our control of Arda for a minute. You do with this situation what you will. It's out of our hands. And so Ilúvatar does. He intervenes. A great chasm in the sea opens up between Númenor and Amon. All of the fleets of the Númenorians are sucked into it. The hills crash down upon the forces of our Farazan, and they're buried underneath. And Númenor, along with them, sinks into the sea. Númenor is completely engulfed and destroyed. This is Tolkien, and he has said as much, this is Tolkien's Atlantean tale. It's his version of sort of the Atlantis myth. Not only is the fleet and everything just completely sucked up into the world, but Ilúvatar takes Amon and Tol Eressëa in the west, and he separates them from the rest of Arda and reshapes the world so that not only can no one, unless they know the way, go to Amon, exactly, but the world is made round. So before this, we haven't mentioned this. Maybe we did.
No, so you and I talked about it. I thought the world was made round after everyone sailed from Grey Havens.
No. This is why the world was made round.
But then how did they sail off the planet?
Because certain people are able to sail what is called the straight road or the straight path.
I see.
Which,
got
if
it.
you
So I wasn't
imagine
confused by
the Arda, the world, as a globe, instead of just, we're going to sail around the world, they sail and then eventually reach the straight path, and they sail tangentially to the world and are able to get to this separate place off of it, separate from it, that contains Amon. And so elves are able to sail that road, and the Maya, and then certain people, like there's exceptions at the end of the Third Age. We see Bilbo and Frodo and Legolas and Gimli eventually, are gifted that ability.
Oh.
So yeah, there's exceptions for great, exceptional people. But this is why the world is made round, so that no one can ever do what the Númenóreans attempted to, and just go to Amon. So big deal. We went from a flat Arda to a round Arda. Now, before the sinking of Númenor, Elendil, remember Amandil's plan, Elendil escapes. As soon as they see that armament leave, Elendil sails, they escape with their sons. And on the way, this happens, and there's big, massive disturbances in the world. And so their fleet, I think they take like 7 or 9 ships. I don't know the exact numbers. They take a fairly small amount of ships, but they're separated. So Elendil and some of his people end up landing in the north near Lindon, and Isildur and Anarion, his sons, land in the south near the mouths of Anduin, which is the great river that the falls of Rhoros, where Boromir dies. That's the Anduin.
Sure.
So in the south, and we'll talk about this more later in another episode, but Isildur and Anarion end up founding the realm of Gondor in the south. And Elendil in the north ends up founding the realm of Arnor. And now with them, they took the seven of the Palantiri as part of the things that the treasures and everything that they took. And these were originally gifted to Amandil by some of the elves of Tol Eressëa. At Tol Eressëa, this island off the coast of Aman that some of the elves live at, is the Master Stone, the Master Palantir. And so 7 of these stones survived and were taken into Middle-earth by these Númenóreans in exile. And originally these stones were made by everyone's favorite creepy uncle, Feanor. Because of course he would make a creepy thing where you can look far distances.
Where you can see. No, it's so obvious.
Yeah, I'm sure there were.
Gross.
That's when he first saw Galadriel's hair. It was just like,
nope,
okay.
stop.
Too far.
No, we all knew it.
Okay. But of course they were made by Feanor because he's the best elf ever. He makes all the cool stuff. But they survived into Middle-earth. They were rescued and taken by Elendil and his sons. Now, I know everyone's asking, well, what happened to Sauron?
Did we ask that?
I'm sure there was some listener shouting at their iPod Mini that they're listening to this on.
Yeah.
What happened to Sauron?
Why am I using this?
So what ends up happening is Sauron is on Númenor. His body dies, but his spirit just goes up and returns to Mordor and Barad-dûr. And he, again, takes up the One Ring. Now, this is a point of contention where it's kind of confusing, because my assumption would always be, well, he's going to have the One Ring on him, right? And I think there might be, I wasn't able to do too much deep diving into this before today's episode, but please, again, send in your letters if you find this out. I believe there is some textual evidence to support he did have the One Ring with him in Númenor, which leads to the question of, how did he get the One Ring back after the sinking of Númenor? Was he able to, did it like go into his incorporeal form and then he was just able to carry it back, or what? Because his body is destroyed in the sinking of Númenor. Or did he leave the One Ring behind in Barad-dûr and just didn't have it in Númenor? Like, it's kind of one of these confusing things that I'm not sure if there's a definitive answer on if he has or doesn't have the One Ring in Númenor, and if he does, how does he get it back? But either way, he ends up going back to Mordor and starts regathering his strength. And we will talk about Arnor and Gondor and all of the things that happen in the late Second Age with those realms, and Elendil and Isildur and Aryan in a later episode. But that is essentially the super brief Cliff Notes version of the tale of Númenor and its downfall.
Which I think you said in the trailer you saw and said that's probably Númenor. Right? Are we going to see Númenor in the trailer? Or in the show?
Yes. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
It's
very cool.
The like one of the major stories of the Second Age, and
very cool. So favorite. Even better that you didn't put too much into it, so that way we can learn about it while watching the show.
Well, yeah, and that's an interesting thing is because I went through all of these. We have all these different rulers, but one of the elements of this show is that there is going to be a condensing of the timeline.
Right.
So my guess would be, so in the trailer, and we know that we're going to have Tarmiriel and we're going to have Ar-Pharazôn. They're major players as far as the royalty in Númenor. So my guess would be we're going to see some of the elements of these various kings all rolled into one character. And this story of the slow corruption of Númenor is going to be told all happening during one rule. And it's going to be much sped up because we have hundreds of years between just, the Númenorians going, you know what? This Band of the Valar thing, what's that all about? And then 1,000 years later, they're like, hey, we're openly speaking out against this. Like, things happen very slowly.
Because they didn't have Twitter.
They
just didn't have Twitter to, accelerate the destruction.
And you know why they didn't? It's because the Valar blessed them with wisdom.
It's still dumbness won out. Alex, thank you so much for all this very, very detailed hard work that you've done and research. It's very exciting. And I do understand this so much better now, just thanks to that. Next week, what can we expect from you?
I think next week it makes sense to continue this story, talking more about Elendil, Isildur, and Aryan, and the events after the downfall of Númenor. So kind of think of it as a sequel almost, a part 2 to this tale.
That sounds exciting. There are so many different ways you can connect with us. We have an email, podcastoftherings@gmail.com. We have a Patreon. You can go to patreon.com/podoftherings. And we also have the same handle over at Twitter, Pod of the Rings. Or you can find me in Solkatu, twitting, and you can yell at us or something like that.
Check the show notes.
Yeah, it's all there. I'm sure you're still listening to this show. I am having a great time doing this show with you. We've done 5 episodes so far. Good job, us.
We're nearing closer and closer to the premiere. I am so excited.
I'm just excited to know you. All right, until next time.
May our roads meet again.
Dun, 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 dun.